Hello and welcome to today's webinar. Apologies, that's a good start to the session. Welcome to today's webinar. Today we're talking all about the wealth of HMO opportunities that very few are aware of. Actually, we all think with the new PD rights, the new change of use, and this sort of stuff that we're looking at, that HMOs have been very much forgotten about. But actually, that's not the case. And so, of course, today we have none other than Matt Baker from the HMO platform to come and help us run through this. So there he is. Hi, Matt. How you doing? Hi, Matt. How you doing?
Hi, Paul. I'm very well. Thank you. Yourself?
Very well. Thank you. Yes, very well. Very well. You may have heard a bit of an echo in the background. What I've got here is I've got various computers set up. So there was a problem with my sound last week. So I've got my computer, and if there are kind of any issues, then perhaps I could ask you just to shout for me, and I'll switch across the sound on a different PC, and that should hopefully then sort us all out. So that's the plan. So welcome, Matt. Thank you for joining us today. So for those who don't know, Matt is of course the co-founder of a training company called the HMO platform. He's an investor, developer. He's got this training company, also sort of a big mentorship as well, helping people invest in HMOs. So we're hopefully in pretty safe hands here with Matt. We're sort of looking at these new changes to planning, and of course the opportunities that it creates, of course. But for those of you who don't, Matt, perhaps we just sort of try to get to know him a little bit before we kind of crack on. And so, Matt, I suppose just a sort of a first question for me is, like, as an investor, as a developer, obviously you've sort of taken a bit of a pivot and you've sort of moved into obviously doing that still, but moving into training. So kind of why do that? Why kind of move into training as a thing rather than just sort of focusing on the day job of development?
Interesting question. Yeah, thanks, Paul, and hi guys. Great to be here. So yeah, we are developers first, and Scott Baker Properties is the name of our development company, and I have that company with my business partner Niall Scott, who's currently signing himself in Antigua at the moment. All right for some. Some of us have the day job, but yeah, so we started off as developers, and one of our key missions is to raise the standard of shared living across the UK. And we're doing it, but we're doing it too slowly for our liking. So what we wanted to do was to kind of work with other developers and other investors and landlords to either upskill them in changing their product they've got today, or what is more likely is to go and buy and develop new projects which can be what we call next level HMOs, and really make a big difference and a big dent in the marketplace, because we work on the HMO kind of strategy, but actually we are moving towards very much a co-living strategy, whereby it's not just about the bricks and mortars, it's about the service and the level of experience that the occupiers of those HMOs have as well.
Amazing. Well, let's perhaps jump into the sort of the content here. Let's kind of jump into kind of what the impact is of these new planning changes on HMOs. So sort of my overwhelming feeling historically has been that kind of HMOs have been a bit kind of forgotten about in many ways, and sort of we think that it's harder now in the current rules, but it's not quite the case, is it? So maybe I can kind of get you to share your screen and kind of give us a bit of a run through of how this all works.
Yep, not a problem at all. So if I just share my screen. I think there are gremlins in the internet at the moment. It's not just you, Paul. Everyone I'm speaking to is having is having those gremlins. At the moment. So there we go. I just checked that you could see that.
Yeah, beautiful. Yeah. No
okay,
gremlins
fantastic. There. I've lost you. Hang on. Let me just get you back. It feels like I'm speaking to somebody. There we go. So, so this is the title that we came up with, because there's a huge opportunity out there at the moment when it comes to HMOs and commercial conversions. So those of you who kind of know what we do and know me, I recognize a couple of names there. Hi, Al. I haven't just picked that name out of thin air. There is an Al in the room that we know and love very a lot. So commercial conversions, those who know us know that we do commercial conversions, and we do commercial conversions to HMO. And I'm going to, throughout the course of this webinar, look at what we've done, the changes, and what that meant for, well, what that means for us as a developer. And then that's going to give hopefully some ideas and tips for what you guys can do using those commercial conversions. But there are a lot of opportunities still out there, even though some think they may well have gone. Okay, so first and foremost, just to kind of give you a sense of the types of projects that we've done. We've done everything from the little buy-to-let all the way up to land that we've got planning on it and flipped it. And so if you look on this screen, we've got on the right-hand side, canvas farms at Port. We've got standard semi-detached houses, small commercial conversions on the bottom left. And in the middle here, we've got a large office that was converted into 21 bedrooms. So we've got a wealth of different types of projects, and they're not all your kind of 70s office block, which I think a lot of people have in mind when you're saying we're going for, mega office to residential conversions. Oh yes, I just thought I'd put this in there. I'm also a best-selling author. Yeah, my book Next Level Landlord came out in March, and hit #1 spot on Amazon, so that's great. And a lot of the ideas around this I do touch on in the book, and especially when it comes to developing HMOs. I'm not talking about our methodologies so much today as I have done in the past with our webinars. We're getting more into the meat of it, but if you want to learn more about the methodologies behind kind of our tenant first method and how we piece it together, then my book is available on Amazon, and hold that thought until the end. But today we're here to talk about commercial property and what does that look like. So I think it's quite important to put the new PD rights into some context. And there's the old way before the 1st of this month, and then there's what's going on from now. And some of you will have been on webinars recently with Paul and others, Ranjan, for example, and you will know some of this. But I'm just going to make sure that everyone's starting with a level playing field, that we know where we're moving from, because we're going to be looking at this from the HMO perspective as an exit strategy at the end. So Class G, these are the permitted development classes of what we can do to properties. And these are the old way. So we had Class G, which is 2 flats above a shop, Class O, which was office to resi, Class M, which was retail to resi, not on the high street. I've got that same water bottle, Paul.
Yes.
Yeah. I was like, how did that get over there? We could do some Zoom tricks to go get it. Yeah, anyway, Class N, casino to resi. So that sounds casino sui gen route. And then we also had some light industrial to resi and all of these other ideas, which the government tried. The interesting thing was there were different rules for each of those classes. Some were quite easy, some were quite expansive, but some were very difficult and quite restrictive to actually get in use. Now, with all of these, it was then okay to take what you created. Let's say you took an office block, turned it into flats, and you wanted those flats all to be 6-bed HMOs. As long as there was no Article 4 direction in place, that was okay using the Class L permitted development right. So as long as there's no article,
kind of, one of the big things with that was kind of then also the Class G, the flat 2 shop, so 2 flats above shops, so you could take a shop Correct. With some space above it, convert that into 2 flats, and those could then be 2 6-bed HMOs using Class L after the Class G in effect at the start.
Yeah, exactly. It's important to know that was quite easy to do, and a lot of people were doing that and creating student like HMO flats, etc. It has changed, and a lot of and just as a kind of a moment just to take stock of what Article 4 is for those of you who are not sure. Basically what it does, it stops our permitted development rights from being used without a full planning application, but it is no reason to panic. So what I meant by we can just do it, we can if there's no Article 4 direction in place. If there is an Article 4 direction in place in that particular area, that's always going to stop you from doing, or not stop you, as it says there, it's going to make it more tricky to get your HMO permission on that particular property. But don't worry, there is still good news. And this is the good news that I absolutely love, is that about the way that the government have reclassified. And I know numbers have been kind of have been getting very excited about the new Class E, the use class. It means all the hard work you did with identifying all those Class A's and B's and C's and D's and everything. It was a kind of a bit waste of time because they're all the same now.
Well,
not quite.
Kind of an interesting question for later, actually. Kind of one of the things that I'm not sure about at the moment is whether the fact they're now all in the same use, the values are all the same, and kind of what opportunities that create, because there is kind of still opportunity. We're talking about HMOs today. There is opportunity to take an office and convert it to residential, or to retail, or retail and convert it to offices, depending on kind of what that. So I think there's still some opportunity around that. Is a shed really an office? Not quite sure yet. And is there value to be held off the back of that? So there's kind of a few questions going on in my head at the moment that kind of could be interesting. But anyway, it's
interesting because you're right. Retail space and office space would be valued differently, and now it's all the same. But totally. What does that mean for HMOs? Well, just to recap for anyone who doesn't know what these use classes are about, it basically takes all the old A1s, A2s, A3s, B1s, and some of the D1s and D2s into one class. So shops, financial professional services, cafes, restaurants, offices, gyms, health clinics, all in one simplified commercial use class, which is actually quite sexy. So in summary, we operate personally, we're residential developers. We operate in the Class C as a residential developer. Class E generally is that business use. And so we're trying to get things from Class E into that Class C residential use. Anything which you see, which is Class F1, F2, and sui generis, generally we leave these alone quite a lot because all of these require full planning. So we don't necessarily leave them alone. The F1s and F2s, generally you leave them alone. The sui generis is a bit of scope there. But anything which is deemed a community asset is always going to be tricky or a lot harder to convert. Not impossible. I know some people really specialize in doing this because other people shy away from it, but it is possible still. So if we take a look at the new PD classes, and now we're moving forward from the 1st of August onwards, we've got this Class MA. Now, Class MA, we now take all of those Class E to residential properties, and we can convert them into to residential with some caveats in place. So we've now got minimum residential space standards. Now, if we think about this from an HMO, if we wanted to create a 6-bed flat or a 3-bed or a 4-bed flat and call it a 4-bed flat, the minimum space standards on those is actually quite huge now. It's much larger than you might have created otherwise and still have good space. It can only, so the amount of space that could be converted from a Class E is only 1,500 square meters. It's a decent amount of space, but we've appraised buildings recently which are more like 3,500 square meters. And looking at using hybrid strategies where we're taking multiple PD rights and applying them at once, and I'll come on to that in a bit. Must be vacant for 3 consecutive months prior. So we've actually got more modern buildings are now open to conversion as well, as long as it's been in the use for 2 years prior and empty. But if it's been vacant and unoccupied whilst it's been going through the sales process, that's quite easy to show that it's been vacant 3 months. So nurseries, healthcare centres, we don't like to lose those. They kind of deem those as community assets. Similarly with kind of shops in town centres on ground floors, they do test to see whether those types of properties are in need or not. But one key thing, which is why we're here today, is talk about HMOs, is that Class L PD right has now gone. So if you convert residential from any Class E using the PD right, they've removed it in the general permitted development order. It's now gone. So no HMOs. Doesn't mean it's not still possible. I'll come on to that in a second. And then we've got the new Class G. So Class G, we kind of watched and waited what was happening with Class G because it didn't kind of come out all at the same time. And we weren't sure whether it was staying, whether it was going, but it didn't go. And then it stayed and it was amended. So what it now means that we can get 2 flats above any Class E. Ooh. So, okay. But we do now. Class G used to be really easy. We used to be able to just do it without asking anyone's permission. So we could have created whatever we wanted. But because the government is now clamping down on minimum space standards, natural light, all of that, we do have to go through the hoops of a prior notification, and to create good quality accommodation, which I think is really important. So we've got minimum residential space standards, natural light in every living room. So it's a bedroom, living room, not a kitchen or a bathroom or cupboards, but all of those rooms need to have windows that have a acceptable natural light. This is where you can come a bit unstuck, which is where I know a lot of people are fighting in kind of appeals at the moment, where no one can decide on what is deemed enough natural light. So there are some which you'd obviously it's a no-brainer, but there might be some other rooms which might be on the borderline. So you just want to be careful with that.
Tip on that, Matt, I think is kind of is the order in which you kind of apply for it, isn't it? So part of it is, if you're going to go in, if you've got a building that's kind of got problems with natural light, it's apply for the elevational changes that get you the natural light first, and then go in for your Class G, because the can I put a window in is a very uncontentious planning application, compared with can I change the use of this stuff that perhaps the council want to protect historically but can't now under the new rights. So get your elevational changes first, and then do your PD rights afterwards.
Yeah, no, definitely. And generally with these types of schemes, there's always a full planning application that needs to go in alongside it to enable those changes to happen, or vice versa. So if you add a window as an office, it's or as a shop, it's less contentious, as you say, and then you change it afterwards. I think that's really good. But prior notification now required. But the Class L PD right, this is the most important thing. It still works. So we can still do 2 flats above a shop, and we can still do HMOs. So we can create essentially a 12-bedroom HMO, assuming there's no Article 4 erection, above an office, or above a hairdresser, or above any of those Class E uses that we talked about. So a lot more opportunities above a lot more properties. And this is where HMOs get easier.
I think that's right. There's also a kind of, perhaps I'm skipping ahead a little bit too much here, but there's something I think that's been sort of bothering me in the past, which has been this vacancy test under the Class MA. So it needs to be empty for 3 months, which means that if you've got a tenant in place, you can't use MA, which means that then you can't sort of maybe be aggressive on a Section 25 notice to push a commercial tenant out if you kind of really want to go and redevelop it into something else. But of course, and what's been bothering me about that is, of course, that with the new Class G, you could demonstrate that you're going to redevelop the upper parts of that, and you could then remove that tenant through the Landlord Tenant Act by using Class G, and there's my planning permission because it's a prior approval as part of that, and there's no vacancy test as part of that that's needed. And actually, you could kind of negotiate your way through by doing Class G first, and then extending that to MA, having then got the vacancy for 3 months, and then you've got the complete building at that point. So I think it's kind of quite an interesting sort of setting these precedents through the journey. I sort of see almost you're going to start with Class G and then Class MA, and then with Class G you've got your Class L, so you've already got some HMOs in there, and then it's kind of, then you've got a residential unit underneath it, and then can that then go to L at the end? So that's kind of what's going to my head. It's kind of there's sort of a blend of these things sort of piecing together that kind of answers the picture, I think.
Well, exactly. So if you use your Class G rights, you've still got your HMOs. So let's say you buy a parade of shops, which is maybe 2 or 3 shops. So you've got potential to have, let's say, the 3 shops. So 6 flats. Those 6 flats could be 6-bed HMOs. So you potentially got a 36-bed HMO all through permitted development. And if the building's larger and you've got a 3rd and a 4th and the 5th story, then you can put those into flats. You probably want a mix of stuff anyway. You're not going to want to have, probably 100 rooms in one building. Depending on where you are, you might want to say, well, I'm looking for 20 rooms plus the rest as flats. And that is exactly the strategy that we're doing. And using the Class G PD rights first enables us to set that precedent, get some resi, and then we can then go and develop with the Class MA. It does pose some issues with lending. It makes lending a bit trickier. So you need some creative lenders on your side. But in terms of the planning strategy, which is what we're talking about today, it's possible, and you can get what you want. which is the most important thing. But where does it make HMOs harder? It's whenever you use Class MA. So the onward HMO use now requires planning permission. Any non-Article 4 area won't know how to deal with this. And this is something that's quite important. So if a council has never had to deal with C4 planning applications, so because they are essentially a non-Article 4 area, you don't need it to permit development rights, Class L. If you have an area like that, and all of a sudden you create, four-bed flats above, within an old office block, and then you want them to be HMOs, you don't have permission for them to be HMOs, but you could apply for the 4 flats to be HMOs subsequently. And they're not going to know how to deal with it because they don't have a policy for it. So you're going to expect some easy wins. So councils just to go, yeah, that's fine. But also where the council doesn't get it and they don't like it, then you expect some refusals, but probably win on appeal, because without policy, it's really hard for them to enforce it. And also, we're talking about small differences in the number of people in those flats. But also you might say, I don't want all of them to be HMOs, maybe 2 of them out of 4, etc. So it gives you some choices. That's where it makes it
Matt, just in the chat, there's a question from Kevin just saying, do these PD rights apply just in England, or do they apply in Wales as well?
That is a very good question, and I'm not 100% on that because I don't operate in Wales.
Yeah, my belief is that Class G and the old PD rights didn't apply in Wales. I don't know about Class MA. I guess that's also the case. I guess this is an England thing rather than a Welsh thing as well.
I think they are different legislation, and there is crossover, but I do believe that planning is a devolved issue, so it needs to come from the Welsh side. So you might need to operate this side of the border if you want to use these. So essentially that's what we need to do, is just know the rules. So with any Article 4 area, as long as we know the rules and we know how to get through them, then we get our permission. So we operate in Article 4 areas all the time with our HMOs because it gives us the best uplift in value. So for example, we buy at say 240, 250, 3-bed houses, we get them revalued up 550 to 600. So that's what we can do with the planning game. So it's our planning game strategy. So similarly, with some of these properties, if you then create an HMO through planning, then there's an argument it has a bit of a higher value as well. And that's to be tested because it does require some comparables, etc. But especially in Article 4 areas, and especially if you go to large HMOs, sui generis, these would have a higher commercial values. And actually, we have had like blocks of HMOs valued commercially, where they take, so in an area where, let's say, a house is valued at, say, 140 on that street, and we've had a 4-bed HMO and a shop valued at 240 instead. So that's like £100,000 difference because it's valued commercially. So depending on where you operate in the country, that may or may not make sense for you. But there's a huge opportunity to kind of maximize some value in getting, maximizing the turnover of mixed use properties. So, did you have any more questions about that, Paul?
No, that's good. Yeah, great, lovely.
So, yeah, I've got a few case studies, or a couple of case studies, and then I'm happy to take questions.
Let's just have a quick question here. So, Harvinder's just there's a couple of things actually. So, Seb and Andrew have just popped up the chat to say all of Wales is Article 4. So those kind of Article 4 tests around density of HMOs within an area relative to residential numbers will apply across the whole of Wales. I don't know if the actual whether the actual kind of the PD rights themselves apply in Wales or not. I'm kind of interested to ask that question. But Harvinder's just saying, so just to clarify, new Class G allows you to convert the upper parts into residential in effect, and then into HMOs. You get 2 flats above it, and then those can both be into 6-bed HMOs in effect. So that then is, first off, step 1, punch the windows in. So planning permission for elevational changes, for putting the windows in to make sure you've got natural light. Next step, Class G, which then gets you the change of use into residential, C3 use, and then Class L the old Class L in effect, which then allows you to go from the 2 flats, 2 C3 flats into 2 C4 flats, i.e. 6 beds.
Bear in mind that planning departments are becoming a bit more pernickety about this, and they actually want you to implement the use. So they want you to use it as a C3 dwelling for a period of time. Okay. So yeah, before you can implement that change. So you might create, for example, 4-bed flats. You might need to stick them on Airbnb for 2 or 3 months, so you get the C3 use, and then once they've been used, then you can occupy them, because the actual the physical makeup of the property is not going to change. It's just how you use it. So but if you were ever challenged on it, and they could say, well, you went straight from office to C4 and you didn't go via C3, it would be quite mean of them to do it. But because the councils are getting wise to some of these ways that we as developers, kind of entrepreneurs, we find the ways around these things, and common sense says, well, you can do this anyway, so why do I have to do the step? But you have to do the step. So just remember that you'll probably need to implement that C3 use. And I have asked this question of a planning consultant, and you can't just put one person in and only give them access to one room, because that's essentially an under-occupied HMO. It would still need to be whole access to the entire property. So my answer to that is just stick it on Airbnb, rent it out to stag do for a weekend, and then make it then a C3 or not a stag do.
Sounds very brave, that, Matt. Sounds very brave.
Well, it's brave. My stag do coming up, so I
was going to say, yeah, I'm sure there's something relevant about that coming up with you, Matt, as well. So yeah, sounds very brave, that. Or other people maybe rather stag do. I don't know. Maybe that's the.
I was going to say, it could be your mates, and you could have a launch party. And stay in it and stick it up, and a good relation. We have a good relationship with service accommodation agencies throughout the country, so they often stick things on Airbnb for us, and rent them, and then don't rent them, etc., as we choose. So some case studies. Was that the questions?
Yeah, cool. Yeah, done. Yeah, let's move on. Yeah.
Brilliant. So those of you that have seen me speak before will recognize this case study, but what I'm going to do, I'm going to use it in a slightly different way for today. We're going to focus on the planning side, and then how we would have done it differently with the new PD rules in place. So just to introduce you to the property, this is in Warrington in the town centre. It's the whole of the double fronted property there, and we've got light wells which we opened out at the front, nice new railings around it. And yeah, we just made it all nice and new. It's an 8-bed HMO and a 1-bed flat down in the basement. So what was our planning strategy? Well, initially, we weren't entirely sure what to do. This was my first commercial conversion. We bought it for £147,000 for all of that space. And we first spoke to an architect who said, oh, you need to go in for planning, and we did, and then we realized actually that we didn't need to go in for planning, and we sacked the architect, and then I put in my own Class O prior notification. So we used that, and we converted the B1 office to 2 C3 dwellings, which was the house, which was the ground, first and second floor, and the flat. So there wasn't a second floor there. We just did a loft conversion, because when you use PD rights, you can convert everything within the envelope of the property, even the roof space. We could have done it as one house, incorporating the basement as well, but we decided, we looked at the numbers, and we thought, well, if we split it, we've got more value, because in the future we could split title and sell the lease on the flat, and that was definitely more valuable than having a room down there just as a room. So that's what we did. And then the house then has a Class L permit development right to be an HMO. So we could occupy that property up to 6 people, which is what we did. But then we applied for planning permission to go from the C4 HMO to sui generis use with 7 bedrooms, which is what we applied for. Now, because those rooms were double rooms, they were testing it for 14 people. So we then were able to occupy with 8 tenants in the HMO, and then 1 tenant in the basement flat. And it was valued commercially at a 10.5% yield. I'm not going to go into how to value things commercially. That's in the book. So you can have a look at this. So that's 10.5% yield. But to give you a sense, it was revalued up at £483,000. And actually, we think it's worth probably about 550 today. So we're just going through a revaluation process for our last year's accounts. So there's evidence to say that comparable properties are selling. So now on to how we would do it if we were going to do it today. Same property, new rules. So this time we can use the Class MA permitted development rights. So I can still do the Class E office, because now a Class E office, to 2 C3 dwellings. So I get the house and the flat. So what I can do then is develop it, and I can occupy the house, I can occupy the flat, and I've got 2 C3 dwellings. Then what I can choose to do is I can apply for C3 to C4 HMO. And what that would do is give me up to 6 people. So that's the bit which I now, because I could go straight from C3 to 7 bedrooms like I did last time. And that gives me the ability to occupy that whole property in one fell swoop. Now, this is where I'd always use the expert. So speaking to your planning consultant to go, well, what does that, how does that council view going from C3 to 7 bed, 3, because essentially that's 2 households up to 7 households. That's a big jump. Whereas you could apply to go for 2 households up to 4, 5 households. That's less of a big jump. And then you could go from the C4 up to the 7. So you're doing it in incremental stages, similar to what Paul was saying earlier. Do it in those stages. It's less contentious. And the easier you can make your life, the better. But sometimes, if it makes sense and you can see that the council is not going to do something stupid, through you can see what they've done previously, whether they've approved C3 to sui gen, then you can put that application straight away and go for what you want straight away. So then we'll be able to occupy the tenants in the HMO and one in the basement flat. And then that would give us, again, a commercial valuation based on 10.5% yield, where we bought it for 147, revalued up at 483. So that's how we would do it this time. Is it riskier? Well, no, because actually we did one over the road where we went from C3 to sui gen and we got it. So we know that the council don't mind. So they would assess it in exactly the same way. So this is on one side of the street, number 13. This is on the other side of the street, number 18. So we know that if you have the right advice, if you can line yourself up correctly, then you're going to be in a strong position to win those arguments. But you just have to get your head around, you're going to have to do more applying for planning. Okay. So that was case
a question that's controversial.
Oh, go for it.
I'd be interested to see what your thoughts are. Well, there's a question in the chat from Karen saying, so in effect, can you take a three-floor office building now, convert it to 3 flats under Class MA, so ground first and second, new PD rights? Yes, you can. Prior approval, Class MA is 3 flats, but it's 3 C3 flats. And the point Matt's making is that the Class L PD rights going from 3 to 4 is then held back with the new PD rights. You can't use Class L on that. What was going through my head, Matt, if I could get you just to jump back to your previous slide so I can see a picture of the building. What was going through my head actually is you could use the new Class G on it, which means that you could have the house elements, you could convert under Class G into up to 2 flats, which would give you the house. And of course, then you could convert that under Class L into 6-bed HMO, thanks very much, and then go back on the basement, which is then under Class MA, and convert that into a single flat.
So the Class G wouldn't allow us to convert the ground floor. So we'd have a slightly different makeup. So we'd have the ground and the basement would always be stuck by Class MA. But we could, and this is, it's good to kind of brainstorm this kind of stuff out. It's like our own mini deal clinic. And then
which, wouldn't that be a good idea?
Well, it might be. So we've got the first floor and the second floor that could be done under Class G. So we could create a 6-bed HMO. We only need to do one, don't we? We don't have to do both of the flats. So we could have basically a 6-bed flat from the ground to the second, which essentially what there is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 rooms in that top one. And then we would have with the 6 rooms but no kitchen. So it would become a 5-bed and then upstairs, and then we would use class MA to do the downstairs, which could become how would I do that? Probably
3 beds,
1, 2, 3. It could be a 3-bed HMO and then a 1-bed flat in the basement. So I could have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So I'd get to this 1, so 5 plus 8 plus 9. So I get to the same end result. But that they would all be 2 C4 HMOs and one bedroom flat.
It'd be a slightly different scheme, wouldn't it? Actually, it would be a slightly different scheme. So it depends on what you wanted at the end of the scheme, because it'd be. You're quite right. I was thinking class G was the 2 flats above a commercial use, but it's 2 flats above ground floor, of course, which means that then maybe we're sort of struggling a little bit with that. So, but then you can use the MA on the ground and basement, can't you? So, interesting. Apologies, a bit of a red herring there. So we'll go back to
the decision. Yeah, that's okay. I think the decision-making process there will come down to values and build cost. So if I'm creating 3 dwellings instead of 2, I've got extra kitchen, extra soundproofing, and less amenity in each flat slightly.
Sure.
So, but if there are some areas where the 3 dwellings would be worth more than the 2. So in Warrington, that 8-bed HMO gets valued quite. Actually, the value we viewed it as essentially like a 10-bed HMO into the whole income for the whole place. So they could still value it that same way. So if you can get a higher rent from doing it that way, then it's definitely is possible.
It sort of depends on the scheme, I think, is the thing, doesn't it? It sort of depends on the particular building, the particular way it might lay out, and you kind of got you almost got kind of 2 schemes running in parallel, saying, well, and what are the values of those, and then what's the relative risk of the back of that, and could you switch between them if there was a kind of a problem with planning and whichever way. And I guess you could be quite clever with it with the council and use that as a negotiation. One of the things that I'm always kind of quite like with this sort of planning game that we play is sort of boxing the council into a corner in effect and saying, well, I've got this, I've got PD rights to do this, and therefore, you can't stop me on that. I've then got PD rights to the ground floor, which gives me this, but actually that scheme isn't the best one. And I'll build that if that's kind of my backstop. But actually, here's now the scheme that I really want, and here's a full application for it, whatever, which then is quite hard to refuse, because if you refuse that one, I'm going to go back to what the rights I've already got, and I'm going to build something that isn't optimal for this particular building. So let's all kind of be sensible with this, and let's have a sort of an adult conversation about how we can make this work.
Yeah, the fallback position is a really strong thing to have up your sleeve. So sometimes it's better to apply for the prior notifications and get those pieces of paper before having the conversation about the full planning application that you're planning to do. But then, I am a firm believer that it's good to have good relationships with the councils. You're working with local, with teams that have good relationship with the councils. So you kind of you go with you dangle the carrot rather than go straight in with the stick. But you back them into a corner, but nicely.
Yeah, exactly.
because they can find odd technicalities, and what we've discovered is that they can and will use these if they have a fundamental issue with your scheme. And I'm going to show you in my next example.
Sure.
Which is this one, case study, 21 bedrooms, 22 bedrooms in here. So this one is in South Manchester in Stockport, and it's a beautiful property. So happy with the end result, but it's been quite a painful time to get to the end result. And I'm going to show you how we thought it was going to go, and then I'm going to actually open kind of the bit behind the curtain of how it actually went, and then I'm going to put that in context with what it's like today with the new PD rights. So the plan with this building, so it was 4,000 square feet of office space over the basement, ground, first and second floor. Essentially, this is just like a bigger version of the one that we just saw. So very similar strategy, but this time, instead of converting to 2, we used the Class O PD rights to go to 7 C3 dwellings. And then the aim was to use the class L PD right to go to 7 lots of C4 HMO. Well, actually, it would have been 6 lots of C4 HMO because one is just a studio flat. And then planning permission for multiple C4 HMOs to go to sui generis use for 21 or 22 bedrooms. Okay, that was the plan. So we ended up with one sui generis large co-living space, which is what the aim was with this particular building. Sounds plausible, wasn't it? Sounds pretty sensible. Yeah. Then bring in Stockport Council. and things don't go to plan. So what we did is we got that permission for the 7 flats, and we started to develop the 7 flats. And the aim was to get to a certain point whereby we could occupy them and then go for planning for that last piece of the puzzle. But what happened was, I'm not going to go into detail about this, but our building control company went bust. If anyone dealt with, there was one large national company that went bust. Then we had to do a resubmit of the building control to the council, and they just dragged their heels on everything. And they wanted us to redo the scheme, and so we had to change things on the fly and undo things. And already submitting our planning application, assuming a finish date. So what it meant was that the planning, because the interesting thing about prior notification and PD is that you have to develop within 3 years, not start, but you have to finish it within 3 years. And this is somewhere where you can very easily come unstuck. So I actually bought the property with the PD already in place. So I was already about halfway through those 3 years before we started the works. And I kind of just assumed it would be fine. We just develop it and it'd be absolutely fine. But because the council had then seen that we wanted this kind of large HMO, they said, well, first of all, you haven't finished the flats, therefore you can't go from HMOs to large HMO. So we had to change the planning application to go from office to large HMO, which then they refused. We appealed, and basically their argument was, well, you didn't finish the conversion in time. And basically we were arguing technicality on what is deemed to be an completed date. And we said, well, it was, you can have beneficial occupation of the properties, all was required was a bit of second fix and painting. That's deemed finished. And they said, no, it wasn't signed off, it's not finished. And an inspector ruled on that. So we do now have to be careful, because it's all these grey areas in planning law, which we've been kind of working with. But I would always now say, finish it, occupy it, do it, just do it in stages, but do it right. And I was just trying to, putting the systems in place and making sure the timeline timed up. But then if something goes wrong, then obviously things don't line up anymore. So because they knew all of this, we still had the class openness development right. So I just resubmitted that and it got us our 7 flats. But this time they put in a condition saying, well, you can't have these as HMOs. So they removed the class L permitted development rights. So basically now what we're doing is we're now going back in for planning to turn about 3 of them from C3 to C4. So what we're doing is we're creating a fallback position of the number of people that are allowed to live in that property. Because for me, they can't really have a contention about converting 2 or 3 of those from 3-bed flats for a family to 4-bed HMOs, or even 3-bed HMOs for 3 tenants. That's the difference. It's, they could have 3 people in there anyway, their own family, or 3 people who are unconnected. So we're doing that, and then if it makes financial sense, we will refinance it as a sui generis property, or it might be the case that those 7 flats become more valuable as individual flats. So we can just operate them as HMO flats, get the same income we wanted. But so we're kind of in this kind of watching and waiting period. So it's been a great example, or great learning for me, but also been a great example of being forced down one route, which actually might be better in the long run. And we can still operate these properties in a great way. So it still is a next level HMO for me, just not in the way that we thought. But look at this planning permission. What does that look like? Well, it looks like the new PD rights. That's what they've done. So we could do it the new way, which is this. So Class O, B1 to C3 dwellings. So we can go multiple C3 to C4 HMOs, like we talked about with the Warrington option. And then you get planning permission for multiple C4 flats to sui generis use for 21, 22 bedrooms. So in our reality on that scheme, it's exactly the same process that we now have to go through. And Paul's now going to say, well, how could you use Class G on this? Well,
how did you read my mind? How did you?
Yeah.
Because you could go class, so you could go a stage further, couldn't you? So you've got a central, it looks like a central entrance with suites either side. So you could put an application in to split the office into individual suites. Then you'd have 2 offices on the ground floor, which then would give you four flats above it, which then you could use your Class L on top of that, which gives you whatever that is, four 6-bed HMOs. Thanks very much. Use your Class MA on the ground floor, then you've got a consent for what you kind of want. You've got enough units. And then you resubmit with minor amendment to the building. So I want to lay out this way rather than that way. And it's like, well, that appeal.
Yeah, but and the interesting thing is that we wouldn't have been able to do that the old way. In fact, because this was an office, Class G wasn't available for this. So actually, this is now a new opportunity that comes, because a property like this, that there was more than one way to do this type of scheme.
Absolutely.
And so it just requires creating that fallback position to prove to the council that there are rules in place that allow us to occupy 4 3-bed flats. So I've got 12 bedrooms and if I think about the layout, so there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 10 rooms on the first and the second floor. So we probably just do 2 5-bed or a 6-bed and a 4-bed, which is essentially what it is. So 6-bed on the ground on the first, 4-bed on the second. It's exactly the same there as it is now. So we'd have 2 HMOs, which we can rent out as HMOs. And then we'd have the ground floor, and the basement, which would be Class MA. So again, we can divide those into probably 1, 2, 3, 4 units as they are now. And then we'd be in the same position we are today, where we then go back and apply for C3 to C4, or if we've got legal ability to occupy 10 plus 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. We've got permission to have 17 people living in that property. So we could apply under PD. We only really wanted to get it to 21. So 17 to 21 is not a dramatic change of use. So again, we would go back and we'd have that conversation about.
Well, the big question is, can you split the office into 2? So if you split the office into 2, you double up your PD, don't you? So if you split it into 2, you've then got 2 lots of 2 flats above the ground floor. So you've got your 4 flats, and you've then got four lots of 6 beds. So you got PD for 24 units. And then you're saying, well, I don't want 24 units split in this way. I want them in a different way. So very interesting.
Yeah, but remember, you've got your minimum space standards as well, and
that's what I think. Can we get those to work off the back of the size that you've got? But it's very interesting.
So if I'm doing a 6-bed HMO on the first floor, I wouldn't put in a planning for a 6-bed HMO. I'd put planning in for probably a 4-bed flat with 2 reception rooms. Once it's been signed off and run as a 4-bed flat with 2 reception rooms for a period of time, maybe a couple of months, then I would just change it to a 6-bed HMO, because I've got the PD right to be able to do it. So implement the change. Similarly with the office, if you're splitting the office in 2, you have to run them as offices. You need to be able to evidence that change and potentially get certificate of lawfulness just to get it in writing.
If that's the case. The big question is it does it need to be run for 2 years? He's just put that into the chat, says it needs to be run for 2 years in that case as well. So there's a few little things to iron out, but this Class G thing is there's legs in this, I'm sure. So it's cool.
So that's kind of the examples I had for today. So back over to you, Paul.
Yeah, I do. Yeah, absolutely. So what I would like to do now is this new thing. So this is like Matt, you haven't seen this yet. This is like the whose line is it anyway of prop tech in effect. This is really me trying to do a thing called Nimbus Storytime in effect. So what I want to do is I want to jump into Nimbus and try to create, this is totally unscripted. I have no idea what's coming. I have no plan around what's here, and hopefully you won't notice that, although I've just told you. So what I'd like to do is to ask the audience to jump onto the chat and give us a location that you want to go search for. I'm then going to go and find that location. I'm going to have a little play around with the Elite platform, and we're going to sort of find some opportunities. Gosh, there we go. That's.
I don't think we've got enough to play with here.
Yeah, we've got. Gosh, yes, we have got a few coming in. So let's jump in at the start of that list. Gosh, that list does go. There's quite a lot of people now. So so let's. Matt, do you want to pick a location? And we'll start at the start, and we'll go through that. So there's on my chat here, there's an awful lot of things that come back. Do you want to pick a location for me? We'll start just there.
Let's go with Kevin Shenfield for the first guy that got in.
Shenfield. I mean, I have no idea where that is.
I have no idea where Shenfield is. Oh, it's Brentwood. Okay.
Brentwood. So just kind of know, this Nimbus is going off and it's sort of Googled that location. In fact, that's what this little search at the top here has done. So it's now plotted the ownership. These little red outlines are ownership sort of title plans, if you like, plotted on the map. We've got some other bits and pieces on there. We're going to ignore that for now. I'm going to just clear that search for a second. So I want to start off and just understand. So I have no idea where on earth we are in the country. I've got a little tip here that it's the M25. So we're just outside the M25, I suspect, out on the east, sort of out towards the east there, I suspect. Yeah, so we're sort of disappearing off in towards kind of Essex. So this is Brentwood here. So what I'm going to do to start with is just start to get a feel for this location for you. So we're going to stick on the market section here. And the first thing I want to understand is firstly average residential values. So this is going to give me, in essence, a little kind of heat map showing me what the values are. So in effect, it's plotting neighborhood boundaries for me, and it's saying, right, what are the sales prices in those areas? What are the sizes of the residential properties that have sold? And giving me kind of a rate per square foot averaged out across the whole lot. So I can see that Shenfield's kind of interesting because it's actually quite a strong area, sort of an affluent part of Brentwood in effect. We sort of see that Brentwood average price about £475 a foot. As we go sort of northeast into Shenfield, those values kind of go up by I want to say best part of 20% actually. It's kind of sort of 15-20% sort of premium to be in that sort of northeast part of Shenfield. Kind of the flip side of that is that Harold Hill, just a little bit sort of southwest down the A12 or A1023 or whatever, those values actually drop off the other way and sort of drop down to sort of 350 quid a foot in lots of sort of quite a big area around there in effect. So it's sort of giving that sort of understanding of actually, we've picked actually quite a nice part of kind of Essex or kind of wherever we are here. What's then kind of interesting is that we can then pop on an HMO overlay as well, and that's going to show me here kind of whether there are any HMOs in the area. So there's a few across Brentwood, but not many in Shenfield. And I guess in many ways, I probably wouldn't expect there to be many in Shenfield because it's that kind of higher value area. So actually what I'm probably thinking about with Shenfield is probably out and out resi. So I'll be looking at flips, I'll be looking at bungalows, going up on those, buying side gardens, back gardens, doing residential developments, kind of out and out, sort of private housing there, rather than necessarily HMOs. I was looking at HMOs, then I would want to go to an area where there's sort of HMOs starting to cluster around. For me, certainly, perhaps if I was Matt, I'd perhaps be more comfortable going in other areas and understanding, sort of knowing those sort of the nuts and bolts that make a good HMO, sort of knowing more about that. But in my head, having done a few HMOs, but not vast numbers, I'd probably want to go to a place where there's a marketplace for that. So I sort of know when I put that building out into the marketplace, there's plenty of opportunity for that. So what I'm probably inclined to do is to move away from Shenfield and say, well, I don't particularly want to search there because of what I've just said. There's not a huge marketplace in Shenfield for HMOs. And actually what I'm better off doing actually is sort of moving down to these sorts of areas where there are an awful lot more. Challenge going to come with that is we're going to have Article 4s probably in those areas. We're going to have, there's so many more HMOs that are there that we're then going to start disappearing some of these challenges that we've got. So I could perhaps start thinking about sort of the edge of Romford, maybe sort of Seven Kings or whatever this is around here, or indeed I could go into, I mean, this is clearly an HMO area where there's clearly vast numbers there. And what Matt's looking at me in a very strange way, which
every house is an HMO.
It's
like every house is an HMO.
Well, it looks like that, doesn't it? And I suppose what that then brings is kind of challenges around that to say, well, actually, how do we find opportunities in those areas?
Yeah.
So perhaps we'll have a little play with that. So we've got this crazy area of everything is HMOs in that area, and you get this a bit when it comes to places like Croydon as well, and sort of areas around there where there's lots and lots of HMOs. And so each of these little red spots are HMOs in effect. What will be interesting actually is just to trigger up our Elite Plus system, because what this will do is we'll show you where there's actually a density of HMOs that's low enough for us to still get the C3 to C4 change of use, regardless of whether there's an Article 4 in place or not. So this little overlay here shows us that even though there's an awful lot of HMOs in that area, there's still pockets of a few little streets where some of these properties still work in effect. And so what it's showing me down here is that something like Kensington Avenue in this part of wherever we are, there's sort of a few properties where it works. These properties here don't work, but these do. It's showing me where there's a single C3 house where the entire house hasn't been broken up into flats. It's a single house, if you like. And it's then got this kind of color coding to it. And the color coding is saying, well, actually, the size of the building on those properties, the warmer it is, the smaller that building is. So what this then would allow us to do is to target those kind of red colored properties in effect, because they would then have an opportunity to extend on the ground floor and put some more units in, perhaps go into the roof space and go into the basement, this sort of stuff. So that's what this is kind of showing. I mean, it's kind of just to kind of illustrate that a little bit. You've got this sort of little house here where you've then got the neighbouring property's got this big sort of extension out the back in effect. So it's kind of very quickly sort of highlighting me into that. But of course, today we're talking Class MA, we're talking commercial conversion. So that is kind of the basic bit is then this is showing us a way of finding opportunities for HMO opportunity. And also within this, we then have some some HMO comparables that we can go and find as well. So I'll perhaps do that in a second. We'll look at how do we find which properties in this area have sold and kind of how many bed spaces there were across all of those. But first off, let's just take a step back and let's have a little play with something like, do you want to go shops uppers, Matt, or do you want to go Class MA? Where would you like to go next?
Oh, I want to do shops with uppers. I want to do this Class G.
You want to do Class G?
Class G thing.
We'll do we'll do shops uppers Class G. There's going to be some changes to the Class G strategy, I suspect, where we're going to start now we've kind of got this new Class E on it. We're going to start having a play with that. But what this one here is the old Class G shops uppers. It's still part of the new Class G. It still applies in the same way. You've got retail on the ground floor rather than perhaps office stuff. So it'll expand out and have more opportunities in it. And this is what this is showing us here is that within these areas, and I was kind of interested around this sort of patch up here, because obviously around here we've got lots and lots of HMOs, sort of a sort of very high density of those that kind of could make life a little tricky. What this is kind of showing me that, if I went somewhere like Ilford's, then actually there's a few properties along here that then might be kind of interesting that we could then perhaps look at converting the upper parts for them. So what this is showing here is that just here we have a small retail unit. This is owned by a company called Primeways Properties Limited. They bought this property back in 1999, actually. And what they've then got on that property is a sort of small retail unit here, which has a little office at the back of it, and then some first floor office space as well. And that first floor office space is actually at a very low value. It's kind of got this sort of average sales price about £3.50. Average rental level kind of back from 2015. So it's kind of, this is the rate assessment that's showing us this, but it's showing us that maybe that rental level is sort of £4 or £5 a foot. And therefore what this is saying is that actually there's a profit to be made off the back of that to convert that into residential. And of course, then we can use our Class LPD rights to understand whether that's, to move that into an HMO use off the back of that. So quite quickly, I can sort of target sort of low value space above a retail unit where I could carve off that front part. I can see that as soon as we get to the zone C, or kind of the back half of this building, we're at this kind of £7 a foot level, £3.50 a foot on first and second, And actually then we can target that to convert that into residential under what was the old class G PD rights and the new class G PD rights, which then means that would convert. I could have my 2 flats off the back of that, and I could then convert those into under class L into HMOs at that point as well. The question then is, well, what are those values now for HMO in this area? And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to just have a little play with that. So in essence, what you've got on the little overlay that I showed you a moment ago was the HMOs in that area in effect. So this is kind of showing us we've got a few HMOs in this area, not vast numbers, but there's some. And if I wanted to go and find out what those had sold for, then what I can do is I can go into the filters up here. I can then set my comparables just to show me residential comparables. This is going to give me a filtered search across this area. If I click apply and then click search here, give that a second. It's just calculating for a moment. And click search here and zoom out just so I can run that search actively. This is now showing me any residential properties that have sold. So within a sort of a narrow area around that property, none of the HMOs that are there are sold. But of course, I have got a huge amount of HMO comparables from the other side of the A406 that I could then go and perhaps look at to understand those. So I'm just going to just extend my search radius out a little bit and perhaps search within, I know half a mile might be, or half a kilometre might be kind of a good distance to search. And that might just pick up a few of these sort of HMOs around here that have sold. There's perhaps a couple down here that have sold and one down there. What I can then do is just drop that into Excel. This will kind of become clear in a second as to why I'm doing this. This is the little Excel file that's is being generated. Just give that a moment to run. There we go. Can you see that that file? Looking on my screen down here, it's not showing that. It's showing yet, Matt. Is that
yep.
Excel file showing?
It is indeed.
Yep, fabulous, great. So what we can see from this file here, in effect, is that these are all the residential properties that have sold within 700 meters of that particular location. And it's showing me the date they sold, the sizes of those from the EPCs, whether it's a house or a flat. And then crucially, what it's then done is it's linked that to the fact that it had an HMO license, which was issued in that case back in 2018.
Yep.
That license there then was for a 2-bed property in effect, and then we can go and sort of dig into the details of that, sort of see details on Rightmove and this sort of stuff. But that's then given me a very quick way of understanding, well, that property sold for 280. There's one down here that had a few more bedrooms that were sold for 333,000, and one down here for 307. So very quickly I can build up a little picture of which properties have sold, what did they sell for, and kind of were they HMOs at the time that that property sold in effect. We just see that sold in November 2019 and had a license granted on it for HMO use back in 2018, so just before that in effect. So very quickly I can build up a little picture of what those values were. It looks to me like a sort of a 4-bed HMO. It's going for sort of 333. So I guess what's that, sort of 80 grand a unit, something like that, 80 grand a room in that area, something like that might be the sort of the right level. We can go and dig into those in more detail, go and find the particulars, understand kind of exactly what that building was it good condition, bad condition, all that kind of stuff. And there's a link through to Rightmove to go and help us find that, or indeed perhaps you might use some of the other websites to go and do all of that. But that kind of gives me sort of a nice little picture around how all that works. The thing I was then thinking of doing actually is if I just reset that and run my search again, it's having a little play with that particular property again and just seeing, well, actually, who are these people that own this property that we're now thinking of targeting? So we've got within the system, we have this little workflow section. I can save that property into my workflow and I can then let a campaign to those people. But the big question is kind of who are Prime Ways Properties Limited? And we'll see whether it's interesting or not. But in essence, what this shows me here is it gives me a little link here into Company's House. So I can start to dig around behind the scenes of this company and say, well, look, they're a little company, they're based out of Ilford. So they're quite local, actually, sort of Ilford, and we're kind of in Ilford in Essex as we sit here. They're a real estate company. So they're owning and letting and operating of their own real estate just there. The people that run this business are a person called Khalid Hussain, who's a company director. We've got Parveen Hussain as well. They were born in 1955 and 1956. They're probably brothers, I suspect. And And of course, if they were born in 1956, what are they, 65 now, if my maths is serving me correct? So you've got kind of two brothers, age 65, that are running this business. There's some people that know that resigned as secretary and this sort of stuff. So it's just the two of them that are running that. And actually, they're still 65 years old now, both of them at that age. There's a kind of question mark around, well, are they thinking of retiring? Are they still, so is that portfolio now something they perhaps want to dispose of? Because now I've got perhaps other plans about retiring and sitting on a beach in Spain, given them been locked up in COVID for the last 2 years and this sort of stuff. Maybe that's the kind of thing going on in their lives at the moment. There is obviously I can link through and see the details of their accounts to see, well, what value is their portfolio? So they've got a sort of a portfolio value. It's actually come down. So in 2018, they had 2 million quid worth of assets. Now got 1.8. So it sounds like that's probably a disposal rather than a revaluation over that time. So actually, perhaps they are thinking about selling stuff at the moment. What's then also perhaps quite cool with this is that I can then click this button that says search company properties. I'm just going to remove this overlay so it kind of becomes a little bit clearer. And I can then see off the back of this, there's a few properties they own all in one little spot down here. So they've got a few here and a few there as well. And actually, I might just export those into Excel because that might just kind of give this a little easier way of understanding this. But we've got these two aging directors sat behind the scenes of this particular property. There's their portfolio. And what's kind of interesting, they haven't bought anything since 2017. Or indeed, kind of one thing in 2017, one in 2016, then some stuff in 2011. Then it's all much kind of older stuff that they've held. So actually, maybe they are in that sort of disposal mode that perhaps is kind of an interesting thing to go and target. And of course, then as I'm sort of looking across Nimbus, then I can sort of go and see, well, what is all that stuff? It's all kind of congregated around the same area here. Then actually, perhaps I could go and target them to go and see if any of that might convert into HMO as part of that. So kind of quite a quick way to sort of dig into all of this. I could then just save all that stuff into my workflow. I can send them letters and find out whether they want to dispose of any of this stuff, kind of knowing that actually there's a fair chance if you've got two people that are 65 years old owning some properties in a property company, that could be an interesting thing to go and do. So hopefully that's been useful. And that was really my kind of whose line is it anyway kind of story time, sort of take you a little journey with some data and kind of geekiness in many ways. And so what I thought I'd do next is just kind of touch on what I looked at today. So what we used as part of these are the Elite Plus strategies that are part of our kind of most powerful platform here at Nimbus. They sort of target lots of different PD rights as part of it. So we've got the new Class ZA, Class A, Class AA, and all the rest of it. But of course, today I used the Class G PD rights and the shops and uppers strategy number 4. We've got a low value commercial properties and residential areas, which will be very useful for today's kind of conversions into HMO. So using the MA on those commercial buildings, giving this new broader Class E use class as part of that. And I also use strategy number 7, which was then that one looking at where do I see residential properties that I can convert into HMOs. Those strategies 7 and 8 comes a package, which is the ones I've just shown you here that look at those residential properties to convert those into C3. And indeed, on the sort of strategy number 8 is looking at commercial HMO, existing HMOs. Can I extend those and put more kind of lettable units into that particular property? The one that I haven't shown you yet is the Class MA PD rights. This is the one then that perhaps we should be using. Actually, Matt, perhaps we should go back and do another story around Class MA. But in essence, what this does is it shows you those Class E commercial properties with the floor space at the right level that means it's not too big for what you're looking to do, to convert it under Class MA. It then overlays a sort of residential feel to that location, so that when we then start thinking about converting these buildings, there is a residential feel to that location. There's other flats around that area, there's other kind of houses around there. So there's kind of a marketplace when we go and convert that. The comment that Matt made earlier around Class MA only applies to certain properties. Well, Article 2.3 land is where it's excluded. So you can't do it in AONB, you can't do it in special protection areas, you can't do it in the Broads, national parks, World Heritage Sites, you can't do it in either. You can't do it in scheduled monuments, you can't do it in listed buildings either, and you can't do it in flood zones 2 or 3 either. So as part of our strategy, we've removed all of that stuff out of the map. So we'll actually do these buildings convert. We've run a financial viability calculation across all of that. I feel like I can't do that without showing it actually, Matt, because this is kind of my new toy. So apologies, we're going to just quickly jump back into this. And so this is the new Class MA PD rights strategy in effect. So what this shows me is, this may well be the nursery. This is the things that are kind of then are tricky. So the nursery there is brought back there. It's kind of showing you that day nursery. That's where Matt was saying, you need to kind of prove the loss of that particular property. But perhaps something like this kind of could be interesting. It's got a 20% return on cost. This is a little office building that's around the corner, just over here on Albert Road. It's got a sort of average sales value in that area of £460 a foot. It's assumed £100 a foot conversion cost, kind of 2/3 of new build for that area in effect. It's saying then that the rental levels across that area for this kind of office is about £21 a foot. And it's saying that if we paid 7% net for that, it would be £280 a foot. That would give us a purchase price for this particular office of 250 grand, a conversion cost of 90, which then gives us a sale price of 416 in that particular location in effect. And then of course what I can then do is usual trick, information panel, understand details around that particular property, save it to my workflow, send my letters out off the back of that in effect. So very quick ways to find sites then that aren't listed, that don't flood, that aren't in any of those kind of problem areas with national parks and all that kind of stuff. With this kind of calculation baked into it to say that in reality, this building should stack up to convert to residential. And off the back of that, you can then also look at your comparables to say, well, would that then work as an HMO at the same time with the little bit of functionality I showed you a moment ago? So very quick ways to sort of dive into all of that. And really that kind of shows you the sort of scale of opportunity across the area. And one of the things that I also kind of like demonstrating as part of this is then just this new commercial availability, which is kind of relevant for today. So what this shows you is then sort of a color-coded way of seeing what properties are on the market in the area. So I'm looking at, say, offices in this area. What this is showing me is that there's sort of a few little buildings that are on the market. This sort of color here is kind of the other uses. And I can sort of zoom out a little bit. I'll just see if I can find, there you go, there's one up there, little office there that's to let, 46 grand worth of rent. I can then go see, there's the link to the title. It's 400 square feet to let, and I can then go off and see the details of that, which gives me a number of kind of interesting things. One is kind of what are the quoting rents? So actually quite high rents actually in terms of this. So it's 400 square meters, so 4,000 feet, kind of 12 quid a foot is what they're quoting for that. And then of course Nick Robinson there would then be an interesting person to go and get in touch with to talk about kind of what rental levels are for this particular building I'm looking at, and sort of understand that local office market at the same time. So that's what the new ZA strategy, sorry, the new MA strategy looks like. We've obviously talked about the shops up as one that we looked at a moment ago. This, in effect, it looks at the Class G with the shops on the ground floor. Will, I suspect, in due course get extended to include all of the Class E uses, but at the moment it sort of picks out those shops for you. Looks at those sustainable locations, picks out the retail on the ground floor, picks out the upper parts that are in low value uses where it's financially viable to convert that. We've talked briefly about the low value commercial properties in residential areas. What this looks at is kind of some of those old PD rights around Class M, Class N, Class O. But in essence, the basic principles of it are saying, looking in sustainable locations where it's financially viable to convert buildings into residential, building in a residential field to that location, removing properties that are in green belt because they can be difficult to get additional dwellings in it, and removing stuff that's in flood zones 2 or 3. And we also have a Class ZA strategy, which is where we can then put extra flats above commercial buildings, where we then bake those into the calculation too. Now, what's great news is that so our elite platform is £1,440 for the year. That's excluding those strategies that we add on top. So the 440 gets you 12 months access to the elite platform. It gives you one-to-one support from our customer success team. You can use a lot of the features, the HMO overlay and the HMO comparables are part of that elite platform. You get access to our customer support team to help you with that. I run weekly webinars that will kind of help you understand that particular piece of software. And we also run a 3-part training session to get you up to kind of the level that I'm at, sort of using this system ourselves. The first of those training sessions starts on the 13th of August. So the end of this week on Friday, I'll be running my first session for that. I have another one the week after, and the one the week after that as well. And that's with the really good news is that we're running a sort of a commercial conversions package at the moment. There's sort of 2 packages that are perhaps relevant for today. The first is our commercial conversions bundle, which brings in all of those overlays and strategies that I've just been showing you. So strategies 1, 4, 5, and 9, which is your Class ZA, your Class G, the low value commercial buildings, and of course the new Class MA strategy. All of that's bundled together. That used to be a cost of £2,400. You get that at half price for the next 2 weeks. We've also got the HMO bundle. So the HMO bundle brings in strategies 7 and 8. That's where you're looking for the C3 properties you can convert to C4, and it looks at the calculation around the number of residential properties versus the number of HMOs and checks the percentage of those. And indeed the second strategy around that, which looks at where do we see HMOs that we could then convert into, extend and put more units onto them in effect. That was £1,200 and that's been reduced £600 again for the next couple of weeks. So next steps, anyone who's interested, we have, if only there was a good idea about a deals clinic, Matt's, so we have actually got that planned for Thursday where we're going to bring Matt back. You can bring your deals and your questions to us and Matt and I will answer those for you live. That's at 4 o'clock on the 12th of August. And if you'd like to tap into our Elite Plus sale, those bundles that I just talked about, then I'm going to pop a link in the chat to allow you to do that. In the meantime, Matt, perhaps you could just let us know if people kind of got questions for you, how you can help them.
Yeah, so actually I've got a different call to action on my screen, so bear with me a second.
Sure.
Cool. So if I just share mine, if that's okay.
Yeah, sure. I've popped in 2 links into the chat. So one is if you want to book a call with Nimbus to access the deals that we've got on for the bundles that we've just talked about. And then Matt, you're over to you.
Yes, so we're actually running a co-living HMO strategy workshop tomorrow night, complimentary for you guys. And it's going to be running from 7 till 9 o'clock tomorrow, and there are other dates available. To kind of get access to that, there's a link. I'm just trying to find.
Yeah, I've popped in the chat. That's it. That's in the chat. The first link I've put in is the link to Matt's HMO workshop, and the second link is then for Nimbus.
Perfect. So yeah, so in that workshop, we're going to be running through how to build the next level HMO portfolio for cash flow, but also remember that book I talked about, for anyone who registers for that, we'll be sending you out. You'll be able to get a copy of that as well when you attend tomorrow night or a future event. So yeah. That's me.
Fabulous. So the final thing, really, so we've got just a few more minutes just to see if anybody would like, if anybody's got any kind of questions for us, then what I would like you to do is to jump onto the sort of the control panel on Zoom, and there's a raise hand button on there. So if you've got some questions you'd like to ask us, then we'll do a little live Q&A. We've got a few people that have already got their hands up at the moment. I'm not sure whether they want to ask questions. We might just check that.
There are six questions in the Q&A chat.
Okay, cool. So let's. I'd rather do that live if we can. So we'll just see. We've got sort of 3 people with their hands up. So let's just see if we can bring them up. So Carlin had his hand up. Hi, Carlin. We're just going to see if we can ask you to unmute yourself if you've got a question for us. Hi, Carlin. Can you hear us all right? Doesn't seem like it. It's maybe a mistake. We may just jump into the chat, but let's just keep going. Ben had a question as well. Let's see if Ben wants to ask that as well. Hi, Ben. Can you hear us? No, not doing well here. And Daniel also had his hand up, so we'll see if Daniel wants to ask a question as well.
Are they able to unmute themselves?
I hope so. I'm asking them to unmute as I click the button. Ben's put his hand down, so that's fine. Daniel still has his hand up. That's this. So John has asked us to raise his hand. Let's just see if we can get John to unmute himself. Hi, John. How are you doing?
Hello, can you hear me?
We can, yes. How you doing?
Just a slightly different question.
Sure.
Recently, the councils are now, the valuation office are now sending out council tax demands for each of the rooms. Is this something you have come across in the past?
Yes, that's definitely a conversation for a pub, and it's a very, very long conversation. But yes, we are in talks and communication and battle mode and all sorts of different things going on with councils at the moment. So it's not the council, it's the VOA.
Correct.
And so we are currently, I'm currently in communication with one council who banded one of ours as rooms, as flats, completely unnecessarily. And we're actually just organised in the process of organising a national campaign to lobby the government to basically add a banding for rooms, so that it makes it a level playing field, increases the cost across the board slightly, but by nowhere near as much as what it's currently doing, and really randomly as well. So you remember that commercial conversion I showed you, the first one, that 8-bed HMO, Warrington, yeah. So that moved from office to residential, so therefore had to get rebanded by the VOA, and the officer that came out could see, the planning permission could see that it was 8 bedrooms with locks on the doors, banded it as a bandy house. But round the corner we've got a 5-bed small HMO, 5 flats. So there's no rhyme or reason, and it's the legislation which is at fault, and I think there's some kind of cover up going on in the VOA, if I'm honest. Correct. We shall see as we keep going, but it's just stay off the radar. That's my piece of advice at the moment with council tax. So with the commercial conversions, what we're currently doing is negotiating with the VOA before we actually do them.
Did you receive prior notification that it was going to happen?
No.
Neither did we. Perhaps I need to contact you outside this. If I put my details on the chat line, perhaps you might.
I would suggest. I would suggest pop a. If you, send me an email. It's probably the best way. Matt@scottbakerproperties.co.uk, and send that to me. And Clive put in the chat there, Wendy Whitaker Large. Yes, that's who we're working with, amongst some others that we're putting a case forward.
Our properties are in Salford.
Yes, so just round the corner. It's the same VOA office and agency.
And have they had a cutoff?
Anyway.
Okay, let's chat
offline. Yeah.
Thank you.
Great. So we've got Gary that wants to ask a question as well. Let's see if we can get Gary up.
Hi guys, can you hear me?
Hi Gary, yeah, absolutely. How you doing?
Yeah, good, thanks. Just a question on if we're already subscribed to a couple of the Nimbus strategies, are we able to still make use of the commercial bundle? Yeah,
sure. Yeah, absolutely. So if you ring into the office, or if you book in your call with the team here, then they can upgrade and prorata and play around with that, I'm sure. So if you use the link in the chat, they'll be able to help with that for you.
Fantastic. Okay, thank you.
How are you finding them, by the way? How are you finding the strategies, Gary?
Yeah, good. We currently do the shops with uppers and the low value commercial ones, so they're good so far. We did actually try to change the shops with uppers to the MA one the other day, but they said we couldn't change midway through the subscription. Yeah,
you should be able to upgrade with the new strategy. I'll get told off this because I always kind of come onto these webinars, and we had 170 people on at one point, and I just give these things, and then it kind of gets upset in the background because there's kind of process and stuff that I kind of just carve straight through. So I'm a bit naughty like that. But yes, I'm sure they can.
I'll speak to them. I'll tell them the boss said.
Something like that. Yeah. It's usually not me that's the boss, unfortunately. So yes, absolutely. Fabulous.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Gary. And then we have Clive that wants to ask a question as well. Let's see if we can get Clive up. Hi, Clive. Just trying to get you unmuted. Let's go. Hey, Clive, how you doing?
Is that it? Have you got me now?
I think so. Yeah, absolutely. How you doing?
It's a stamp duty question about if you're doing a conversion above a shop, if it's uninhabitable.
Yep.
I understand that stamp duty doesn't apply.
Yes. Yep. So gosh, now you're testing me. So we run various webinars with a company called Cornerstone, and I can probably get you the link to speak to them about it. But in essence, there's sort of various ways in which stamp duty doesn't apply. So if you're buying dwellings that aren't habitable, then you don't pay stamp duty on that space. My guess is the same applies for commercial, but I must confess I don't know that that's necessarily the case. So if it's
my gut, my inclination is the same as yours. It's for residential, not habitable. Basically you pay commercial rates as opposed to residential rates, is my understanding, and which means that then for commercial property which is uninhabitable, I think you pay commercial rates because it's already really cheap.
I thought you paid 0% stamp duty actually on uninhabitable residential property. I believe, I could be wrong, but that's what I thought was the case, rather than
well, so check with the experts. We've only done it once, and it was the amount was low enough to have been zero anyway. So
it's only 77,000 purchase price. So
that's zero regardless.
I just thought I'd ask that question while you were there. Thank you.
But also bear in mind that with commercial conversion for business rates, if it's uninhabitable, you can get your business rates just applied as well.
Yep, great, thank you.
Clive, I'll pop a link into the chat for you anyway, which is there's a sort of a no obligation call you can have with Cornerstone, one of the previous companies that have done webinars with us. So I'll pop that link into the chat for you. If you click on that, fill your details out, they'll give you a call back and tell you what the answer to that is. So rather than have my not quite sure and Matt's we think so but not sure, then you can get a formal answer from the guys that know. So
thanks very much.
Fabulous. I think that's covered the majority of questions. There are one or two questions in the Q&A, albeit I'm just slightly conscious of time, Matt. So we gave ourselves sort of an hour to do this. We're now an hour and 27 minutes in. So maybe it's time really just for me to say really kind of firstly thank you to you, Matt, for your great presentation today. Really interesting, really engaging, thoroughly enjoyed it. Thank you so much for joining us. And of course, we'll look forward to seeing you on Thursday for a deals clinic where we're going to look at that in more detail. So thank you very much indeed.
No worries. Thank you, Paul.
And then just finally, a thank you from me to you all for watching. Hope it's been helpful. Hopefully you've enjoyed it today. I've been Nimbus Maps. Sorry, I've been Paul Davis. I've been Nimbus Maps. I've been Paul Davis. We've been Nimbus Maps, and we'll look forward to seeing you again soon. All the best. Bye for now.